This building has stood on the north bank of the Thames since 1078. That is 947 years. It has outlasted every dynasty, every plague, every war, and every regime change England has ever seen. Roughly 3 million people walk through its gates every year, making it one of the most visited historic sites on Earth. And in the spring of 2025, archaeologists digging beneath it found something that stops the entire team in their tracks. This is the Tower of London. Not a single tower, a complex of 23 towers spanning 12 acres, whose history stretches across nearly 1,000 years of English life. It has been a royal palace, a state prison, a treasury, a zoo, and an execution ground. Sometimes all at the same time. But what they found beneath it this year may be the most revealing thing the tower has ever given up. In spring 2025, a construction project began at the Chapel Royal of St Peter ad Vincula, the small church that sits within the tower walls, to install a new lift for visitor accessibility. To do that, archaeologists had to dig. What began as a practical necessity became, in the words of Alfred Hawkins, curator of historic buildings at historic royal palaces, a generational opportunity. It was the most significant excavation at the tower in a generation. Conducted by Pre-Construct Archaeology, in partnership with historic royal palaces and with the consent of Historic England, the dig went more than 2 meters below the surface, reaching layers not touched since the 1970s. What they found was this: the remains of between 25 and 50 individuals across more than 20 burial sites, and among them, a collection of 7 burials from a 14th century context that, in the words of the excavation team, appeared rushed, dug without ceremony, without care, without the usual reverence afforded to the dead. Burials, officials said, that were possibly linked to the Black Death. But here is the thing. To understand why 7 rushed graves beneath England's most famous castle matter so much, you have to go all the way back to the beginning. The year is 1066. William, Duke of Normandy, has just defeated King Harold at the Battle of Hastings. He has conquered England, but England is not yet his. London is a hostile Anglo-Saxon city of perhaps 10,000 people, and he knows that control on paper means nothing without control in stone. So he builds. Construction on the White Tower began around 1078. The stone he chose was not English. It was Caen limestone, shipped from Normandy specifically because of the way it looked. It was pale, almost white, and it gleamed in a way that nothing in 11th century England could match. At 90 feet tall, the White Tower was the largest structure most Londoners had ever seen. William understood that architecture is also a message. That message was simple. This land is ours now, and we are not leaving. The stone itself arrived by sea up the Thames, and the building rose over the bones of a Roman fort, because the tower has never stood on neutral ground. The Romans had garrisoned this bend in the river for centuries. William built on top of their legacy, just as those who came after him would build on top of his. Over the following centuries, the complex expanded. Henry III added the outer defensive walls between 1238 and 1272. Edward I completed the concentric ring of fortifications that you can still walk today. By the time the full complex was finished, 23 named towers ringed a 12-acre site, whose architecture now spans Roman remnants, Norman masonry, Tudor additions, and Victorian restoration. A physical cross-section of English history, all in one place. But calling the tower a castle undersells what it became. At various points in its history, it housed the Royal Mint, which struck every coin in circulation in England for 500 years, by hand, until mechanised production moved the operation out in 1811. It housed a menagerie of exotic animals, including lions, a polar bear, and an elephant, gifted to various monarchs as diplomatic gestures. It stored the national arsenal, and from its very earliest days, it held prisoners. That last function is what most people remember, and the tower earned that reputation in ways that even now are difficult to fully absorb. Stand in the centre of the tower complex today, near the execution site on Tower Green. And think about who walked this same ground. Anne Boleyn arrived at the tower in May 1536. She had been here before, under very different circumstances. 3 years earlier, she had been brought here the night before her coronation, as was the tradition for English monarchs. She spent that night in the royal apartments in splendour. In 1536, she was brought back through Traitor's Gate under arrest. On the 19th of May 1536, she was executed on Tower Green. She was buried in the Chapel Royal of St Peter ad Vincula, the very same chapel where archaeologists were digging in 2025. Catherine Howard, Henry's fifth wife, followed 6 years later in 1542. Same charge, same gate, same end, same chapel. Henry VIII imprisoned and executed 2 of his 6 wives at the Tower of London. That is not a metaphor, that is the documented record. Then there are the princes in the tower, perhaps the most enduring mystery in English royal history. In the summer of 1483, 12-year-old Edward V and his younger brother, Richard, Duke of York, aged 9, were lodged in the tower by their uncle, Richard, Duke of Gloucester, who would shortly crown himself Richard III. The boys were seen less and less frequently in the windows of the tower over the following weeks. Then they were not seen at all. No credible account of their deaths has ever been found. In 1674, workers renovating a staircase discovered 2 small skeletons. Charles II had them interred in Westminster Abbey as the presumed remains of the princes. They have never been formally identified. Their fate remains officially unsolved. Guy Fawkes was brought here in November 1605 after the gunpowder plot collapsed. He was tortured in the tower until he gave up the names of his co-conspirators. His signature on his confession document, scrawled after days of interrogation, is barely legible, the hand of a man in serious physical distress. And then there is Sir Walter Raleigh, whose story offers one of the tower's most remarkable contrasts. He was imprisoned here from 1603 to 1616, 13 years, on a charge of treason against James I. During those 13 years, he wrote a 1,400-page work called The History of the World. He also cultivated a medicinal herb garden in a small outbuilding near the Bloody Tower. The site of that garden still exists within the tower grounds today. In one of the most violent and brutal institutions in English history, a man spent over a decade growing plants and writing books. The tower has always contained this contradiction: cruelty and scholarship, execution and coronation, prison and palace. It is a place that has never been just one thing, and that is precisely what makes the 2025 discovery so resonant. Return now to those 7 rushed burials from the 14th century, lying beneath the floor of the chapel where Anne Boleyn and Catherine Howard are interred. The Black Death reached England in 1348. It arrived on ships at the port of Weymouth, and moved through the country with a speed and lethality that was unlike anything the medieval world had experienced. Estimates vary, but it is broadly accepted that somewhere between 30 and 60% of England's population died within 2 years of its arrival. London was devastated. The city responded by establishing emergency burial grounds, specifically to manage the scale of plague casualties. 2 of these were located close to the Tower of London. The question that the archaeologists are now asking is, why were these 7 individuals, buried in haste, without ceremony, in what appears to be a shared grave, interred inside the tower's chapel grounds, rather than in those dedicated plague cemeteries? Alfred Hawkins, the excavation's lead curator, has suggested a possibility. These burials may predate the establishment of London's formal plague cemeteries. They may be among the earliest victims of the Black Death in London, buried before the city had even begun to understand the scale of what was arriving. If DNA testing of the remains at Cardiff University confirms the presence of Yersinia pestis, the bacterium that causes plague, these individuals would represent some of the most significant Black Death burials ever found in England. The remains from the 2025 dig have been transferred to Cardiff University for analysis. Results are still pending. Above all of this, directly above ground that may hold England's earliest plague victims, sits the Jewel House, home to the crown jewels. The Star of Africa, at 530.2 carats, the largest colourless cut diamond in the world. The Imperial State Crown, set with 2,868 diamonds. The most guarded and most visited objects in Britain, stored above earth that 7 centuries ago may have swallowed the first people in London to die of the Black Death. The tower has never stopped being used. That is the strangest thing about it. It is not a ruin. It is not a museum in the conventional sense. Approximately 150 people live within the tower complex right now. Yeoman warders, known as beefeaters, and their families. It has a functioning resident community inside medieval walls. And every night, at exactly 21:53, the chief yeoman warder of the Tower of London emerges from the Bywood Tower in Tudor ceremonial uniform, carrying a candle lantern and the sovereign's keys, and locks the outer gates. This is the ceremony of the keys. It has been performed every night for at least 700 years. Written instructions for securing the gates at night date to the 16th century, and the tradition is believed to go back to at least the 14th. It has been interrupted precisely once. On the night of the 16th of April 1941, a German bomb detonated in the tower grounds. The escort party was knocked off their feet. They stood up, dusted off their uniforms, retrieved the keys, and completed the ceremony. Approximately 30 minutes late, a letter was sent to King George VI explaining the delay. He replied that the circumstances were quite understandable. The ceremony has taken place without interruption on every night since. 6 ravens are kept at the tower at all times, maintained by a dedicated raven master. The legend, first documented in the reign of Charles II in the 17th century, holds that if the ravens ever leave, the crown and the tower will fall. During the Second World War, raven numbers fell critically. Winston Churchill personally ordered their replenishment. These are not heritage performances. They are the tower still insisting on itself. So, beneath England's most famous castle, beneath the chapel where 3 beheaded queens are buried, beneath the ground where kings were once crowned and prisoners were once broken, there may lie the bodies of some of the first people in London to die of the Black Death. People buried in a hurry, without names, without ceremony, before the city had even begun to understand what was coming. The analysis is ongoing. Cardiff University has the remains. We do not yet have a confirmed answer. And that, honestly, is part of why this discovery is so extraordinary. Because it reminds us that nearly 1,000 years into the tower's documented history, it is still giving things up, still yielding new information, still surprising people who thought they already knew the story. The tower has been a palace, a prison, a mint, a zoo, a jewel house, and now, perhaps, an archive for the dead that nobody knew was there. It was always there. We just hadn't looked.